Sophie had only one dream, to play the violin. But when the teachers called her on stage, it was never to celebrate her talent. It was a joke. A janitor's daughter, worn-out shoes, and old violin held together with tape. The auditorium filled with muffled laughter. "What can she possibly play?" a teacher muttered under her breath. But the moment Sophie drew her bow across the strings, the room fell silent. Spines straightened, breaths hitched, and within seconds, everything changed. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now let's begin. The auditorium was packed with students and teachers, their whispers and laughter echoing off the walls. Sophie stood at the edge of the stage, gripping the violin so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her father's janitor uniform was barely visible from behind the curtain, but she knew he was there, watching with quiet pride. The moment she had always dreamed of was finally here, but not for the reasons she had hoped. It had started as a cruel joke. "Why do not we let Sophie play?" one of the teachers had suggested during the talent show rehearsals, smirking as she said it. The other staff members had exchanged amused glances, knowing exactly what she meant. Sophie had never been part of the music program. She had never been offered lessons. She had only been seen cleaning the music room after school while her father mopped the hallways. The idea of her performing on stage was ridiculous to them. Sophie had hesitated when they called her name, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her. The students snickered, nudging each other. A few whispered insults reached her ears. She had learned to ignore them over the years, but tonight they stung more than usual. She stepped forward, her old shoes barely making a sound on the polished wood. The violin in her hands had been a gift from her father, found in a storage closet and repaired with glue and determination. It was not perfect, but it was hers. A microphone screeched as a teacher cleared her throat. "Let us see what you have got, Sophie," she said, her voice laced with condescension. Sophie took a deep breath. Her fingers trembled as she positioned them on the strings. The bow felt heavier than usual. Then she played. The first note rang out, piercing through the murmurs like a lightning bolt. The laughter died instantly. The air shifted. A deep, haunting melody filled the room, rich with emotion. It was not just music, it was a story, a lifetime of pain and resilience woven into every note. The teachers exchanged glances, their amusement replaced with disbelief. The students sat frozen, their expressions unreadable. Even the principal, who had been checking his watch moments ago, leaned forward in his seat. Sophie closed her eyes, letting the music consume her. She did not need their approval. She did not need their validation. She had spent years watching others play from the shadows, memorizing every movement, every technique. She had practiced in secret, using borrowed sheet music and broken strings. Now her soul poured through the violin, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As the final note faded, silence stretched across the room. No one moved, no one breathed. The teachers, who had once laughed at the idea of her playing, now looked like they had seen a ghost. And then, one person stood up. A single pair of hands clapped, breaking the suffocating silence in the auditorium. It was slow at first, hesitant, as if the person could not believe what they had just heard. Then another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into thunderous applause. Sophie stood frozen, her violin still tucked under her chin. Her chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths, but inside her heart pounded wildly. She had expected laughter, mockery, maybe even outright humiliation. But this was something she had never imagined. On the side of the stage, her father gripped the mop handle, his fingers white from the pressure. His eyes glistened with something unspoken. Pride, awe, maybe even disbelief. He had always told her she was special, that her music had a magic no one else could understand. But Sophie had never truly believed him. Until now. The students who had whispered behind their hands before were now on their feet. The same teachers who had smirked at her earlier exchanged awkward glances, as if realizing just how wrong they had been. One of them, Miss Harper, the school's music director, pressed a hand against her chest, eyes wide with shock. Sophie finally lowered the violin. She wanted to move, to walk off the stage and disappear into the safety of the backstage area. But her legs refused to cooperate. Instead, she stood there, taking in the overwhelming sight of people who had never seen her before, really seen her. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, Ms. Harper rushed forward. She nearly tripped over the wires on the stage floor in her haste, but she did not stop. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, her voice urgent. "Who taught you?" Sophie hesitated. The truth felt too simple, too impossible. "I taught myself," she said quietly. Ms. Harper blinked, clearly taken aback. That, that is not possible." Sophie did not respond. She simply held on to her violin, feeling the weight of years of practice, stolen moments of rehearsing in empty rooms, using broken strings and borrowed bows. Another teacher, Mr. Reynolds, stepped forward. "You have never had lessons? No formal training?" Sophie shook her head. "Just my dad's old records and whatever I could find online." Ms. Harper turned back toward the other teachers, her expression unreadable. Then she faced Sophie again. "You need to audition for Juilliard." The words sent a shockwave through the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The students who had once dismissed her now looked at her with something entirely new. Admiration, maybe even envy. Sophie felt her throat tighten. Juilliard? That was a dream she had never even dared to whisper out loud. It was impossible, completely out of reach. "I cannot," she said before she could stop herself. Ms. Harper frowned. "Why not?" Sophie glanced toward the side of the stage where her father stood. His uniform was wrinkled, his hands still damp from hours of cleaning. She knew the cost of auditions, the price of lessons, the kind of resources kids at Juilliard had. "That world is not for someone like me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Harper's eyes softened. "That world is for anyone with talent. And you," she took a deep breath, "are the most talented student I have ever heard in my life." Sophie wanted to believe her. She wanted to let the warmth of those words sink in. But doubt clung to her like a second skin. Then from the back of the auditorium, a voice cut through the noise. "I will pay for her audition." A stunned silence fell over the auditorium. Heads turned toward the back of the room, searching for the source of the voice. Sophie's breath hitched as she spotted a man rising from one of the seats near the exit. He was tall, dressed in a sharp navy suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. His presence alone commanded attention. Ms. Harper took a step forward, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place him. "I am sorry, but who are you?" The man gave a small, knowing smile as he walked down the aisle, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "Daniel Whitmore." A murmur spread through the teachers. Even Sophie recognized the name. Whitmore was one of the most renowned violinists in the country, a Juilliard graduate, a former symphony concert master, and now a prestigious music patron who scouted for talent. You are Daniel Whitmore," Ms. Harper breathed, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You are here? At our school?" Whitmore reached the edge of the stage, his gaze fixed on Sophie. "I was supposed to leave an hour ago," he admitted, "but I stayed when I heard someone tuning a violin backstage. I thought it was a recording at first, but then she started playing, and I knew. I had to see for myself." Sophie's pulse pounded in her ears. She had no idea how to respond, so she simply stood there, gripping her violin as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. Whitmore turned to Ms. Harper. "You were right. This girl has something special, and talent like that should never be wasted." He looked back at Sophie. "If the audition fees are a problem, consider them taken care of." The murmurs in the crowd turned into gasps. A few students whispered furiously among themselves, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The teachers exchanged glances, some looking embarrassed, others amazed. Sophie's father took a cautious step forward from the side of the stage, his eyes wary. "Sir, that is too generous," he said hesitantly. Whitmore's expression softened. "No, it is not. It is an investment, one I am more than willing to make." Sophie felt her throat tighten again, but this time it was not doubt or fear. It was something dangerously close to hope. I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Whitmore said simply. She looked at her father, her eyes searching for his guidance. He had always been her biggest supporter, but this was beyond anything they had ever imagined. Her father swallowed hard, then gave her a small nod. If this is what you want, Sophie, then you should go for it. The weight of the moment settled on her chest. This was everything she had ever dreamed of. And yet the fear of failure still loomed in the back of her mind. What if I am not good enough, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Whitmore smiled, his eyes filled with certainty. You do not have to be perfect. You just have to try. Sophie took a deep breath. She thought of all the times she had played alone in empty rooms, all the times she had dreamed of something bigger, but had never dared to believe in it. She looked back at Whitmore, then at Ms. Harper, then finally at her father. And in that moment, she made her decision. Okay, she said, her voice steady. I will do it. The applause that followed was louder than anything she had ever heard. The moment Sophie said yes, everything changed. The tension in the auditorium dissolved into a mixture of awe and excitement. Students whispered furiously among themselves, their eyes flickering between Sophie and Daniel Whitmore. Some of the teachers still looked skeptical, but others seemed shaken, as if realizing they had just witnessed something far bigger than a simple school performance. Whitmore extended his hand toward Sophie. Come with me, he said. There is someone you need to meet. Sophie hesitated. She glanced at her father, whose expression was unreadable, but he gave her a reassuring nod. Taking a deep breath, she stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted as she followed Whitmore toward the exit. Ms. Harper trailed behind them, looking both curious and slightly apprehensive. As they stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, Sophie's heart pounded. She had no idea what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. This was a turning point. A sleek black car was parked by the curb. The driver, a man in a pressed suit, stepped out and opened the door. Whitmore gestured for Sophie to get in. Where are we going? She asked, her voice small. Whitmore gave her a knowing smile. Trust me. She slid into the seat, her violin still clutched tightly in her lap. Her father hesitated for a moment before getting in beside her. Ms. Harper, looking unsure, remained on the sidewalk as the door shut and the car pulled away. The ride was silent. Sophie stared out the window, watching the town blur past. Every so often, she stole a glance at Whitmore, who seemed perfectly at ease. Minutes later, the car pulled up in front of a grand building. Sophie's breath hitched as she read the gold-lettered sign above the entrance. Whitmore Conservatory of Music. She turned to him in shock. You are taking me here? Whitmore chuckled. You belong here. Her father exhaled sharply. Sir, we cannot afford. You do not have to, Whitmore interrupted. I am offering her a full scholarship. Sophie's head spun. A scholarship? Whitmore nodded. One of the most prestigious in the country. We rarely award it to students who have not formally auditioned, but after what I heard today, there is no doubt in my mind. Sophie swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment pressed down on her. But why me? Whitmore's expression turned serious. Because talent like yours is rare, and because I know what it feels like to be overlooked. His words hung in the air. Sophie's mind raced back to all the times she had played in empty rooms, all the times she had watched other kids get opportunities she could only dream of. And now here she was, being handed something she never thought possible. Come inside, Whitmore said. There is one more thing I want you to see. Sophie exchanged a glance with her father before nodding. As they stepped out of the car, she felt an unfamiliar sensation bubbling inside her. Hope. They entered the conservatory, and the air smelled of polished wood and sheet music. The halls were lined with framed portraits of legendary musicians. Sophie's footsteps echoed as she followed Whitmore through a set of double doors. Inside, a grand concert hall stretched before them. A magnificent stage stood at the front, illuminated by soft golden lights. Stand there, Whitmore instructed, pointing to the center of the stage. Sophie hesitated but obeyed. The moment she stepped onto the polished wood, something shifted inside her. This was where she was meant to be. Whitmore handed her a sheet of music. Play this! She glanced at the notes. Intricate, challenging, yet beautiful. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her violin. And as her bow touched the strings, the first note rang out, filling the hall with a sound so pure, so powerful, that even she was stunned. As Sophie played, the grand concert hall seemed to come alive. Each note resonated through the space, wrapping itself around the walls and echoing back with breathtaking clarity. It was nothing like playing in her small apartment or the school auditorium. This was different. This was magic. Her fingers danced over the strings, pouring every emotion she had ever felt into the music. The struggles, the loneliness, the quiet determination. All of it found a voice in the melody. It was as if the violin itself was telling her story, and for the first time, the world was truly listening. When the final note lingered in the air, silence followed, a heavy, charged silence. Sophie lowered her bow, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She looked up, expecting Whitmore to say something, but he simply stood there, hands clasped, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. "I knew it," he said softly. "You are exactly what I thought you were." Her father stepped forward, his eyes glassy. That was incredible." Sophie let out a breathless laugh, still trying to process everything. She had played in front of a world-renowned musician inside one of the most prestigious conservatories in the country, and she had not just played, she had thrived. Whitmore turned toward the stage entrance. "There is someone I want you to meet." Sophie's stomach tightened with nerves as the door opened. A woman in an elegant black dress stepped inside. She carried herself with quiet authority, her gaze sharp yet kind. Sophie recognized her instantly. Eleanor Finch, the director of the Whitmore Conservatory. She approached Sophie, studying her carefully. "Daniel told me about you," she said, "but hearing you play, that was something else." Sophie gripped her violin tightly. "Thank you." Finch nodded, then turned to Whitmore. "You were right. She is exceptional." Whitmore chuckled. "I usually am." Finch focused on Sophie again. "We would like to offer you a place here, effective immediately." Sophie's breath caught. "You mean I could study here?" "With full tuition covered," Finch confirmed. "Room and board as well. If you accept, you will have access to world-class instructors, resources, and opportunities that most musicians only dream of." Sophie's heart pounded. This was more than she had ever dared to hope for. But before she could answer, a doubt crept into her mind. "What about my dad?" she asked, turning to him. "I cannot leave him behind." Her father smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "Sophie, this is your dream. You have to go after it. But I will be fine," he assured her. "You have spent your whole life looking out for me. Now it is time for you to do something for yourself." Sophie swallowed hard, emotions crashing over her. She had never imagined this moment would come so soon. But standing in this hall, surrounded by people who believed in her, she knew what her answer had to be. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, I accept." Finch extended a hand, and Sophie shook it, feeling the weight of a new future settling onto her shoulders. Whitmore beamed. "Welcome to Whitmore Conservatory." Sophie glanced at her father, who nodded in encouragement. For the first time in her life, she was not just a janitor's daughter. She was a musician, a student, a rising star. And this was only the beginning. Sophie stood in the grand hall of Whitmore Conservatory, her fingers still trembling from the weight of the moment. She had spent years believing that dreams were reserved for those with privilege, for those born into the right circumstances. Yet here she was, not just standing among them, but being welcomed as one of them. The reality of it still felt unreal. Her father pulled her into a tight embrace. "I am so proud of you, Sophie." His voice was thick with emotion. "Your mother would have been too." Tears burned in her eyes as she whispered, "I hope so." Daniel Whitmore placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This is your new beginning. But remember, talent alone is never enough. You will have to work harder than ever before." Sophie nodded. She had never shied away from hard work. Within days, she moved into the student dormitory, a place so different from her small apartment that it felt like another world. The walls were lined with soundproof practice rooms, and every hallway echoed with the sounds of violin, cello, and piano. Students moved with quiet confidence, their eyes filled with ambition. Sophie felt out of place, but she reminded herself she had earned this. Her first class was with Professor Callahan, a strict but respected instructor known for producing some of the best violinists in the country. He watched as she positioned her violin and played a piece she had memorized long ago. The moment she finished, he stared at her with an unreadable expression. "You play with feeling," he said finally, "but your technique needs refinement. We will fix that." Sophie braced herself for long hours of practice, but nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of the training. Her fingers ached, her back protested, but she refused to quit. Every night, when exhaustion threatened to consume her, she thought about her father, about all the times she had played in secret, believing that no one would ever hear her. Now the world was listening. Weeks passed, and Sophie's progress became undeniable. Her bowing grew smoother, her intonation sharper. Even Callahan, who rarely gave compliments, began to nod in approval. Other students, who once dismissed her as an outsider, started to take notice. Then came the announcement, an annual showcase where the best students would perform for an audience of talent scouts, composers, and industry professionals. It was an opportunity that could change everything. Sophie hesitated. She had only been at the conservatory for a short time. Was she ready for something this big? "You should audition," Whitmore encouraged her. "You have more than just skill, Sophie. You have something that cannot be taught." Her father echoed the sentiment. "You have never backed down before? Do not start now." With a deep breath, Sophie signed up. The night of the showcase arrived faster than she expected. As she stepped onto the stage, she saw a familiar face in the audience. Mr. Reynolds, her old music teacher, the man who had dismissed her as nothing more than a janitor's daughter. For a moment, nerves threatened to consume her, but then she lifted her violin, closed her eyes, and played. This time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. The music swelled, carrying every emotion she had ever felt, every struggle, every victory. The audience sat frozen, captivated by the raw beauty of it. Even Mr. Reynolds, who had once mocked her, now watched with wide, astonished eyes. When the final note faded into silence, the room remained still for just a second before erupting into applause. Sophie stood there, breathless, as people rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. She had done it, and as she looked out into the crowd, she knew this was only the beginning.